Welcome to the Irish NFL Show and welcome to our Week 7 Talking Points brought to you by Buskers on the Ball in Dublin's Temple Bar. Check out Buskers on the Ball on Sunday evenings where they show a selection of live games and Red Zone every NFL weekend. The Irish NFL Show, incidentally, will be making a cameo appearance in Buskers this Saturday where we'll be recording some new content for the weekend, so check that out too. In Week 7, the Eagles bounced back. The 49ers didn't. The Chiefs underlined their Super Bowl credentials with a 6th straight win. The Lions took a beatdown from the Ravens. The Patriots upset the Bills. And for the very first time this season, every single one of the Irish NFL Show supported teams managed to win. Hallelujah. Aidan's Steelers, Brian's Giants, Colum's Broncos, and my Bears all put, in one way or another, surprising W's in the column for themselves. So it had to happen eventually. We finally got there this weekend. Lots of talking points, though. We start, Brian, with the two heavyweight battles that we saw over the weekend, both with unexpected results, really, depending on which way you were expecting them to pan out going in. Lions-Ravens and Eagles-Dolphins were the two blue-chip matchups we saw over the weekend. Let's start with Lions-Ravens, because I don't think anyone expected a beatdown of that magnitude. You know, I think a couple of us had favoured the Ravens going in. Yourself, myself, obviously, we're lucky enough to see them in London the other week and get a view of them up close. We both came away impressed, but I guess we had seen nothing in comparison to what Lamar and his cohorts put up at the weekend.
No, it's probably one of you have to argue it's one of Lamar's greatest performances. I was looking at the numbers today: 503 yards of total offense. He's 21 for 27. And 4 touchdowns. When I say 4 touchdowns, 4 out of 4 on the opening drives. I mean, they literally went down on this Lions team. I read an interesting one today on the Lions. They took last Wednesday off, which was an unusual. Dan Campbell decided not to do a practice session. Instead, did a walkthrough. And now I wonder how, there was a lot of conversations last week about how the players were coming off the previous victory. I wonder were they more banged up than we imagined going into that game, because they did have quite a few injuries. We saw Gibbs come back, running back, and had a good game. It's probably one of the positives that came out of the comprehensive defeat. But this Ravens team, I mean, I think the title of this show tonight is, are the Ravens and now the main challengers within the AFC? You'd have to argue they're not really the way Lamar's playing. It's arguably the greatest. I mean, he was near perfection. And you've got the players now. We've spoken the offseason, Colin, yourself, Connor, even around the players that he has at his disposal, offensively, the wide receivers, we're talking about Odell Beckham there, we're talking about Zay Flowers, he's hit the ground running, saw the first hand in London, Bateman, and the yards after catch, so like and they're putting the ball down the middle of the field, which is Lamar's greatest strength, to put the ball in the middle of the field. They're actually now, they're utilising his best assets, and they've got players now that are stepping up as well, because for a long time we saw players not doing what they needed to do around Lamar and the frustrations, but right now it just everything seems to be clicking.
But you said something when we were watching the game in London. You said Lamar just looks so much more patient. He looks like he's patient, he's poised, and he has trust in what Todd Monken is doing around him. Like, there seems to be a meeting of the minds there, and it maybe took a little bit of time to get going. I mean, arguably, if we're marking down the Ravens, they should be 7-0. The games that they actually dropped were games that they really should have won, particularly that game against the Steelers. I mean, how they lost that one, I do not know, with all those drops. Just seemed a very strange game. But you watch Lamar, and there was one particular play where old Lamar would have just taken off. He would have took the ball under his arm, but he stayed alive as a passer and waited for something to happen. He did that kind of Mahomes thing where the longer you stay alive, the more likely it is someone's going to be wide open when everything breaks down. And he found Aguilar completely unmarked in the end zone for a touchdown. And you're seeing that time and time again. And you combine that with the fact that he takes that hard step and the defense immediately freezes and somebody pops open, because they have to be aware of what he can do when he does decide to run. And it's not like he hasn't been running or they haven't been factoring in design runs. But Monken has just a great line in misdirection, which every great play caller needs on both sides of the ball. You don't know who's going to pop up and how they're going to use people in interesting ways. There's a role for Patrick Ricard in that offense. He had a really nice run on what looked like it was going to be a deep play, and they just caught him with loads of room to run, and he churns down the field. And they're using Gus Edwards. They don't seem to. If they had J.K. Dobbins, they'd be absolutely lethal. All of these pieces in the offense, Monken seems to be finding a way to utilize them, and Lamar seems to be able to get the best out of them.
Yeah, this patience piece, I mean, you touched on it there. Like, is our defense is aware of this now, because as you said, normally 9 times out of 10 in the past, he would up and he'd go on the run, and that's not the case. But yeah, he's still finding the way into the end zone. He scored the opening touchdown in the game. He had 2 in Baltimore. He had 2 a previous week at home. But yeah, he's not going at the level of extent that we're seeing before. It's like as if Todd Monken has created this perfect blend of offense now, where we'll run him in particular plays where we think it's necessary, but ultimately we'll try to find ways of giving the pass. The percentage of drop passes in that game was way down compared to what we saw in that Steelers game, and ultimately that Steelers game you referred to there, those catches are caught. The game is won. So yeah, that's another piece, but just team with the run game as well.
But Colin, it's clearly not just on one side of the ball, because the Ravens are harassing quarterbacks. I mean, in a league that is just right now stuffed with elite pass rushers, and we will get to Myles Garrett before the end of the show. We'll have plenty to say about Myles, but the Ravens have racked up more sacks than any other defense. They're spreading it around. They've got arguably the two best linebackers in the league. They're well stocked in the secondary, and even though they're banged up, they were more than able to contain the Lions. What happened there?
Mike McDonald has been absolutely fantastic, and I think this was kind of a matchup of two of the hottest coordinators, you would have to say, in terms of Ben Johnson going up against McDonald, and McDonald has done a magnificent job there, and they had an answer for everything the Lions do and everything the Lions tried to do. It was like he picked the perfect. It was as if I know there's obviously the sign or signal stealing case in Michigan, and Josh McDaniels was doing it with my own team, and obviously the Patriots, but it was almost like he knew exactly what they were going to do, and the looks that the Lions are giving them, you heard, I don't know if people might have seen that after the game, one of the Ravens players came out and said, if you can rattle Goff early, he never quite looks the same. I think that's a bit of afterwards. You can say things like that, and there's a truism afterwards. But I just think he is going to be, and it's probably a wider piece. He will undoubtedly be in the head coach conversations, but it is kind of the year of the defense in many ways. But I just have to say, because my computer blue screened, which is always fantastic when it does that. But I came in at the end, and I think things have changed a little bit for Lamar, and he isn't taken off. But part of that is because they have finally surrounded him with talent. Right? Why did it take so long for the Ravens to do that? Why did it take so long to get the contract done? This is not new, right? Lamar beat the brakes off of Vic Fangio a few years ago in Denver when Vic basically said, "Oh, you can't beat me with your arm," and he absolutely went out and did a number on him. This is what Lamar does. Lamar's on a revenge tour. Stephen Ruiz did a great piece earlier in the year where he highlighted all of Lamar's stats against the teams who had turned him down. And Dan Campbell and the Lions were one of the team who said, "Nah, we're not going to go for Lamar." And I don't understand, again, going back to it. Even if you thought the Ravens were going to match it, why not make an offer? Lamar is playing at an MVP level. He is magic. He is absolutely ridiculous. And the Ravens are getting the benefit of it now, but that no one else. Are you telling me the Falcons were prepared to go all in on Deshaun Watson, but you weren't prepared to do it for Lamar Jackson? There's some very silly decision makers around the league.
Well, Colin, let's just remember that this is the guy that some people thought might be better playing as wide receiver when he came into the league. There's a lot of dumb GMs out there.
Can I jump in there? Just on a point there, Colin, why wouldn't you put the offer in now, even if the Ravens are going to match it? Because the offer in which you put in sits on your cap until the very last day of the business year, whether you are successful in the deal or not. So I'd imagine a lot of teams would have said,
Well, but make the Ravens step up and make it. You could not have known that they would do it. Somebody out there, it's insanity to me that teams who, if they had Lamar Jackson elevates your team so much, and he okay, people might want to say again the injury record. I really don't think it was nearly as bad. This is a guy who's absolutely squeaky clean off the field, and that no one was willing to. I think some of it, Connor, is what you're saying. This is a guy who, unfortunately, the narrative still exists out there that, he couldn't pass, he couldn't beat you with his arm. Well, he's shown teams this year.
Before we move on to the other heavyweight bout, let's just maybe look at the Lions briefly, because I'm interested in what we're thinking about Detroit after this loss. I mean, you touched on it there, Colin, where that comment about, oh, if you get to Goff early. I mean, to be fair, that's probably true of most quarterbacks in the league, but it did show you again that nobody wants to be behind 2 scores playing against a defense as good as Baltimore's when they can pin their ears back. And Detroit, perhaps arguably more than a lot of other teams, they are built to front run. Their offense works best when they don't have to chase anyone down. I know that's, again, true of a lot of teams, but they're able to play at their own tempo. They're able to run the ball, and they run the ball well. They're able to keep Goff clean. And it's all very different. And none of that happened at the weekend, Brian, and they paid the price for it.
Yeah, it's just like sometimes, like, we have to bear in mind, sometimes in the NFL on a Sunday, sometimes these games get away from you early. That game got away from me early. They had to move very quickly away from, I imagine, the game plan, which was to try have an effective run game. But when you find yourself down 2 scores early and you're chasing, like, are the Lions geared to chase? I thought they're a better suited team to chase games. Bearing in mind how expansive their offense can be when they're off at times. But like, right now, I think we just have to recognize they're going up against a juggernaut that are playing at the peak of their powers right now, and both offensively and defensively. I think I wouldn't be getting too tuned downhearted if I was a Lions fan. I don't think they will either. I think they recognize that there's going to be games this season that they just it's above their weight level, and they're gradually trying to get up to that stage. But ultimately, when it comes against teams, which is why I think me and you kind of went for the Ravens, we just felt experience and where they are at level and these type of contested games that they've been in over the years, it would suit them better as opposed to the Lions. But the Lions have got the Raiders on Monday. It's a nice, well, be careful what you say in the NFL these days, but judging by what we saw and we're going to get into, it looks like a nice game to get back on track.
Eagles-Dolphins, Column, another one of those heavyweight bouts over the weekend. Looked on paper quite a tough assignment for the Eagles after taking their first loss of the season, but in the end they had 2 scores to spare over the Dolphins. Obviously not great to see Jalen Hurts getting hurt in the process, although he toughed it out as he will tends to do. Certainly a guy that everybody recognizes has no problem playing through pain and still able to play at an elite level. They won't want to see him banged up, but on the whole, they'll have really liked what they saw against Miami. You put yourself up against that high-powered offense, you keep them under wraps enough, and you're able to do your own thing. It couldn't have worked out better for Philadelphia, apart from that Hurts injury.
Yeah, no, I mean, defensively, they were really impressive. Like they put the Dolphins, under probably the most like pressure. Nothing quite worked for Tua. They basically took away a lot of his options. Tyreek Hill is the fastest player in the league. He's explosive, and overall, they did a pretty good job containing him in so much as you can. I think this was all about the power. It was all about like the defensive line and the offensive line. Really, they've already been out this week. Howie is doing deals as Howie tends to do. I think was it Bill Barnwell tweeted out, if you're in Tennessee, why are you even picking up the phone when you see a 215 number call you? Because they've done. I mean,
I'm not going to get called like that again. I'm not going to give you AJ Brown and ruin our entire franchise yet.
So you look at it and you go, what was the area? Yeah, a bit weak at safety. Well, we've gone and we've sorted that out. I mean, yeah, like we will see. It was interesting, and this is, 2 people can look at the same thing, because I saw plenty of tweets said, oh, Jalen Hurts looked fine. To me, he definitely looked like he was limping coming off at the end, even though he was running down the tunnel. But the Eagles, I think they are still going to struggle. Like, when you lose somebody, I've talked about it before, the caliber of Shane Steichen, it's going to impact on your offense. But we saw again the power that they have and their ability as a defensive unit to contain and ruin even the high-powered offenses. I wouldn't be too down on the Dolphins. I mean, I think you could run this game back again, and like 7-8 times out of 10, I think the Eagles probably win. But I think there's certainly scenarios where there's no reason the Dolphins, things go right early on and the Dolphins are able to run up a few scores.
What do you make of that, Brian? Because look, it shows, I guess, the gap to the very top that the Dolphins have, which doesn't, to be fair, look that far.
Spoke to a couple of Dolphins fans on Friday after we done our show and took time out to listen to the podcast piece of it around this particular game. And they were saying as well as the Dolphins have been playing, they've been masking over a concern on the offensive line. There's been injuries there. And a lot of the play calling that they've installed this season, as we've seen, is to get the ball out as early as possible because they're still not convinced and they're still not comfortable with the offensive line. And that came to pass and came to fruition in the game. Like the front seven, the Eagles were dominant, and maybe we were kind of misguided in our opinions and thoughts on this game because we've been speaking so highly of defenses, I suppose, having the upper hand this season. That was very evident in the game. I mean, they held the Dolphins total 244 yards offense. Like when you're doing that, bearing in mind how expansive they've been in terms of the numbers this season, it's no mean feat. And then also, I suppose you could argue, Colin's got a fair point. Like Waddle went out of the game for large parts. I know he came back in the second half, but there was kind of a critical point in the game where he was missing for large parts, and they were reliant on other players to make plays. And even if you look at the scores in which the Dolphins got, I mean, they had a pick six, return for a touchdown, which kind of brought them back into the game. They didn't even put a lot of points on the board offensively. The Eagles just, that front seven in particular, and if that front seven can play like the Eagles, that's what the level they were at last year for large parts of the season. That's what, like we speak about the offense, but let's recognize how strong that defense was last year, and if you can get back to that level, it puts them in the right position come January.
And it's funny. I thought, when we were picking games last week, that you would see McDaniel really attack Philadelphia over the middle, which usually is the place where Philadelphia are going to give you something. If anything, slight softness maybe in that linebacker core, and you can get at them. Actually, it was the opposite. It was the Eagles that did that to the Dolphins. They really got Dallas Goedert going for probably the first time this season, and that seemed ultimately to be decisive. Now, maybe before we move into our second segment where we're going to talk about teams, and spoiler alert, you can include one or two of our own in that who might just have saved their seasons with a victory over the weekend. It was interesting to see that the big talking point, Brian, at the end of that Browns victory in Indianapolis, of course, the pass interference goal on a ball that Donovan Peoples-Jones, if he had a jetpack, might have had a chance of catching, but that ultimately gave the Browns possession at the goal line, and eventually they managed to punch it in with Kareem Hunt and win the game. Big talking point on the refs there. But you wanted to highlight some other issues from that game, Brian, that you picked up. Yeah,
it was more towards the end of the first half. We talk about, and in fairness, the head coach has done a great job there, and it doesn't look like he's going to change the nature of how he wants to do the play calling. He always wants to be aggressive, but like we talk about situational football, and with 1:57 to go in the first half, with Cleveland, they put them on their 5-yard line, and the Browns have got 2 timeouts. So in that position, bearing in mind they have Jonathan Taylor back and Moss, I would have thought they would have looked to run. They didn't. They went for the pass in the first down, essentially. Then it was an incomplete pass, so that stops the clock. And then obviously the second one, he goes again, and then he ends up, we end up in the end zone and a fumble, and obviously recovered by Myles Garrett. And then they get the ball back. They quickly have because obviously they have to kick back to the Browns because of the they get the ball back because it wasn't safe. They get the ball back immediately. And he went for the exact same style. He looked past 3 times and he didn't kill enough time off the clock. I thought he would have learned from the first time around. He had to give him the ball back. They then drive down and get a field goal. Like there was 10 points there before half time, with a little bit more kind of, I suppose, kind of recognizing where we are in the game rather than looking to have an expansive offense. Now, the Colts fans could challenge us and say, look how many points we put up over the game. That's what we want to see from our offense over the course of the season. But sometimes in certain games when, other coaches who have been around the corner many times, I don't think they would have went down that route. They would have recognized we're in a bit of a position here. We're playing against a team. And Myles Garrett, who on his day was unbelievably blocked a field goal earlier in the game. He's just a wrecking ball. Surely you kind of recognize we're in this game with a big opportunity. And ultimately that came down to cost him. And everybody's talking about the flag. Don't get me wrong, it was a ridiculous call. He's never catching that ball no matter where he is. But like those 10 points are golden in a game that's there to be won. I just think they look at that and he'll recognize maybe during the week that if we only had done things differently towards halftime, we may have got away with it. But look, I'm probably doing it a bit unfair, but that's how I saw it as well.
Before we move on from that game, Colin, you couldn't call yourself a football fan if we don't talk about Myles Garrett and what he did in that game. Brian touched on the fact that he even managed to block a field goal. He was absolutely sensational. I was watching some clips of his off-season workout where he's doing those 64-inch box jumps. It is not fair for a guy that size, that big and that powerful to also be as explosive and quick and skillful as he is. Like, he just put on an all-around defensive masterclass. It was a joy to watch.
Yeah, and the Browns can be lucky that he did, because I mean, I get what Brian is saying, but like, this is a defense, remember, that was being talked about as generational, right? That we hadn't seen defenses like this since like the 70s, and then they go and they
Gardner Minshew cutting them up, yeah.
38 points on them, and like, what he did was really interesting, and like, it's fascinating, I suppose, some of the things that happen, right? Because we talked about it, touched on it last week. Jim Schwartz versus Kyle Shanahan. Jim Schwartz is 9-1 now, and like, it's almost like Kyle refuses to back down. Like, what the Browns defense tends to do is like, it's like, you're not going to bully us. We're going to like get you, one-on-one, mano-a-mano. And Kyle played right into that. Whereas Shane Steichen went away from that. It was all the disguises. It was all different looks. They ensured the Browns really didn't know what they were doing. And it put the defense, other than Myles Garrett, in absolute fits. And Garrett is a special player. He is incredibly talented. His reading of the game, everything he does, he is truly, one of the best pass rushers in the game today. He's absolutely in the running for Defensive Player of the Year. And in fairness, like, when you look at it, say that when you look back at the evidence now, right? Because people will say, Patrick Mahomes went in that draft, but nobody could have known then, even if you took all the evidence, right? What Patrick Mahomes was going to become. So the Browns taking Myles Garrett, it still turned out pretty well for them, because he is a wrecking ball. Even when the rest of the defense, he truly put the team on his back. The other thing, just to touch on, Connor, in relation to this, is they didn't put Deshaun Watson back in, right? Even though they said that he could have gone back in if PJ Walker. Now, again, Deshaun's not like, he started off terribly. It's just an interesting piece. I mean, again, you invest that much in him, especially guaranteed. And, if they had, a QB who was playing, average, then this could be a Browns team that are serious business, but they still have questions to me at QB.
Connor, can I make a quick one? Sorry. No, sorry, just a quick one on that. I found a bit weird and off-putting that he just didn't take the easy way out and say, yeah, he had a concussion, because he clearly does fall on the back of his head. But yeah, he came out and said he had a shoulder injury. That doesn't make any sense either, because he never hit a shoulder. And if the evidence is there, everybody can see the video footage. He clearly comes down in the back of his head. It would have been so much easier for them to say, we don't want to put him back in. I know then obviously he has to go into concussion protocol, but he could have said something else. He just said, rather than saying it's a shoulder injury and he can go back into the game, just cause another storyline that they probably don't need. And, they got a tough game this weekend. And they're suggesting he's going to play again. But I agree with Colin. Something's a bit off. It sounds a bit like buyer's remorse there. And they can't obviously wrangle their way out of this contract, but like something clearly is evident, is from the evidence it's not right.
All right, we move into the second segment of our talking points with a little bit of SOS, save our season, because we saw a couple of struggling teams pull off wins that might just prove to be the turning points in their season. We might start with the first of those, Colin, which is the Vikings, who posted their second straight victory, and suddenly things are looking a lot better in Minnesota. From having won all those one-score games last year, they couldn't buy a win in a one-score game this year until the trustworthy Bears came into town and they turned them over, and they backed it up.
Yeah, and they're in a weird one, right? I'd said before the season started, I thought this could be a Minnesota team who wouldn't win as many games, but who'd be better than they were last year. And Kirk Cousins showed up in prime time. We know all the talk about Kirk, but Brian Flores has made a real difference there. Ultimately, I suppose it's kind of a strange one, right? Because Kirk is in the last year of his deal. It would seem by all accounts that he's probably not going to be back in Minnesota next year. At least that's the talk amongst all the beat writers. If you look at any of the chatter around it, could Kirk end up in the Bay? We know Kyle Shanahan has always been a huge admirer of Kirk Cousins. That could be something to keep an eye on. But it's tough to know for the Vikings, I suppose, what they are going to do at QB. Kevin O'Connell, very smart, very, very smart guy. And I don't know if people saw the video of the dressing room afterwards, but he certainly has them fired up. I suppose that, for him, it's about trying to, win as many games in that respect. Their next game obviously is against the Panthers in Green Bay. But I suppose, what's the situation, right? Because they could, or against the Packers, could they find themselves in a Packers type situation next year where like you don't have the QB, you have the talent maybe around them, but what happens then? So it is a very strange situation that the Vikings find themselves in. But you look at their next kind of, say, 6 games, certainly. Packers, Falcons, Saints, Broncos, Bears and Raiders. I mean, you got to think they should be coming out with 4 wins out of that, certainly.
And Brian, for them, it wasn't just that they managed to pull this game out at the weekend, against the 49ers, when a lot of people, myself included, would have thought that would have gone San Francisco's way. Everything fell for them at the weekend because the Lions lost, and they made up a game there, and the Packers lost, and so suddenly they're kind of back in the mix in the NFC North. The Lions aren't running away with it anymore, and to Colm's point, the way the schedule is shaped up for them, they're in a much better position 2 weeks on. An awful lot has happened to go in their favor.
Yeah, and am I right in saying they still have to play the Lions twice? I can't recall whether they played each other earlier in the season.
No, I don't think they have. No.
Yeah, so they've got 2 games to run against them. I mean, essentially, you're in tie-break scenarios if they can beat them when those games come around. But yeah, they're like, that's why we speak about like teams who are in 1-4 records, 1-5. There's a lot to play for, and people get carried away with the trade deadline and potentially Kirk Cousins moving on. Another players, various different teams, but like they've navigated their way back into in a game which no one ultimately gave them any opportunity. But Columns said it there. I'll double down. Like Brian Flores has quickly addressed this. We saw it with other teams last year as well, how quickly defenses can be molded into a different type of unit and start playing to get Purdy in a position on Monday night where like we've gone from a situation where Purdy's never been intercepted to 2 games in a row, and he was very uncomfortable throughout for large parts of the game. But it's ultimately now for this game for me this weekend is a bit of a marquee game because the Vikings, they're going to Green Bay. It's always a tough game, and if they want to put themselves back in the position, they can get out of this tough start to the season at 500 after 8 games going into not midpoints, but it'd be a huge win if they can do this weekend in particular, and it kind of pushes the Packers back because Packers are kind of falling off slightly, but yourself come Sunday in an NFC North clash, the Packers will be looking to put the number down on the Vikings, which they've done in the past in Lambeau.
Oh, I know myself only too well, Brian, what happens on a Sunday in Green Bay.
One final thing on this, because it kind of became this talking point, like about Kevin O'Connell and telling Hawkinson to go down, or was he telling him to fake an injury? I don't think he's telling him to fake an injury. I think Hawkinson is genuinely injured on that play. I think he just doesn't want him hobbling to the sideline and trying to get guys in and out. So he's just saying, you're actually injured. You need to go down here so we can get the right personnel on the field.
Brian, you teed me up nicely there when you said 1-5 teams who still have a lot to play for, because another one of them managed to chalk up a win over the weekend. It was your Giants, of course. Crucial divisional game as well against the Commanders. If we're talking tiebreakers, that's a nice one to have in the pocket. Back in the race?
I wouldn't go that far yet, but I think I knew this was a game. I know I picked the Commanders, but maybe I was doing that tongue in cheek because we've owned the Commanders for quite some time. But essentially, this is the part of the season now for the Giants. This is the weight level. The Giants, we're talking about schedule run-ups in terms of who they got. Like, you got Zach Wilson and this weekend, and you'd ask, a couple of weeks back, you'd say Rodgers or Wilson, you'd gladly take a shot at Wilson. Then they have the Raiders, and they got the Packers coming up at home, Patriots coming up at home. You can argue they're winnable games, but just in this particular game, I mean, I don't think this game did a true reflection of the score. The Giants were dominant throughout the course of the game. They sacked Howell 6 times in the first half. There's a Saquon fumble in the red zone when it looked like they're about to put the game away. The Kayvon dropped ball, which looked like a pick 6. There was other various different plays in the game. They were totally dominant, and it was one of those situations where you're wondering, are they going to just lose another one that they should have had, because they should have had the Buffalo game the week prior. But the defense is really starting to turn a corner. It's starting to go back to the Wink Martindale type of defense we've seen last year. They had a turnover battle of 3-0 in Miami a couple of weeks ago, which wasn't, and the defense played quite well because of the difficulty in offense. It really wasn't recognized how well they played in that game, and then played well in Buffalo, played well this week. They got to keep that going ultimately, because I don't think offensively they have enough to, keep with teams if they find themselves giving up 25 to 26 points. But a very interesting game now come Sunday, bearing in mind the Jets are coming off the bye. But yeah, I think there's still a glimmer of hope. I think because of the nature of the schedule, I think the Giants could find their way back into this, but they're going to need to be playing at the level they played defensively last weekend.
Colin, I'm not sure if the Patriots necessarily belong in the save our season bracket, but it was a big win for them at the weekend against the Bills, and certainly shows there's still life in that team and life in Bill Belichick's defense. Much though other people might have been speculating on whether this might be his last season in New England, they're not done yet.
No, and I mean, I suppose the interesting thing was that clearly there was a message. They were trying to calm the waters before this with the contract news, because and that was interestingly worded in many respects, right? You had multiple years. Well, that means more than one, and so that could be 23 and 24. But it was a way, I think, of trying to calm things down, because this time last week, the Belichick was on the hottest of seats, at least in the media landscape. And there's life in the old dog yet, and they caused the Bills real issues. Obviously, the Bills in the first half, they have to figure that out, because even with the injuries, and the stories have kind of started to come out now about Sean McDermott has a hand in the offensive side of things, but yeah, for the Patriots, Bill gets his 300th. It's difficult to imagine that they will be back in, say, the playoff hunt, but I do think it probably helps to calm things down, and they can we'll see what they follow it up with.
They got the Dolphins this weekend, so let's hope for their sake it's not a 65-point shellacking.
Well, I suppose they had done a decent job. Like, prior to what the Eagles did, they had probably done one of the better jobs in terms of taming that Dolphins offense. Now, I don't think fans will expect a win, but I think if the Bills can put in a competent showing, and if Mac Jones can continue to take step forwards, like this was the first time, I think, since Mac Jones became the starter, that they scored more than 25 points and won. Or sorry, an opponent scored more than 25 points and the Patriots still won. Now that is quite something. That the victories prior to this have all come. They needed the defense to really step up. So that was a step in the right direction. But they need many, many more steps.
We'll bring you back in a second, column to talk Broncos, but for Brian, it was a big win for Denver against Green Bay. Not the prettiest of games, one might say, only a fan could love. But is that enough to put the hope back in the Mile High City, do you think?
Oh, it's difficult, really, isn't it? Because of the schedule, the nature. Like, you got the Chiefs this weekend. You're going to come off a victory, and then all of a sudden you got arguably the best team in the AFC, if not the NFL, coming to town. I mean, there was a bit more resilience about them in this game, because of the way in which the Packers came back. When you've lost games time and time again, haven't had a lead over the course of the season, which the Broncos have had, and they should have really closed out games. You see the Packers coming back, you think, oh, here we go again. But the defense did step up at the end. But for me, the storyline coming to the game, and say for the wrong reason, was the Jackson. Like, I know Colin has this feeling on this. Hopefully he wants to throw in his tuppence word on this, but Jackson's got a 4-game suspension coming off this bad hit in the game, and it's time and time again over the course of the season. I think Colin called it out. It's his fourth fines, right? He's already did 4 fines this season, and obviously now he's been suspended for 4 games. They need all players on deck to be in with a race, but maybe you're better off playing with players like that, because it's not good for the team. I thought Russell Wilson over the course of the game played reasonably well. The touchdown was a nice one to something. I know Sean Payton is, by all accounts, is the one who called it, as opposed to the Wilson, and maybe that's a sign of the times that things are changing in Denver, and the coach is calling the plays as opposed to the quarterback.
Colin, before you talk more widely, like as Brian said, that Kareem Jackson suspension is probably not overdue. There's hard hitting, and then there's unnecessary roughness. I mean, it's a beautiful choice of NFL terminology, but we're talking about some pretty dirty hits among that mix there in that lowlights reel.
Yeah, I suppose there's a number of things that kind of jump out in relation to this, because I suppose Broncos fans have been going nuts about it. His teammates and plenty of former Broncos players have also obviously come out in support, right? You expect that, get around your guy. Harrison Smith talked about this earlier on today. He was on McAfee, and I suppose they kind of grew up. I think Jackson is even older than Harrison Smith. And Harrison talked about like growing up, the era of, and he grew up watching the Broncos, of Steve Atwater, right? And the famous hit against the Packers to kind of close out that game, where basically Atwater takes a Packer out, a teammate out, and himself out. But that was 1997. Like, things have moved on infinitely since then. And what I don't understand is, why Kareem Jackson, who seems like a very smart person. You see him in interviews, you see him on social media. He's obviously got the nuance, but he can't learn that the game has changed. And the game has changed for player safety. There are over 350 former NFL players who have had their brains autopsied after death and been diagnosed with CTE. 350 that we know about. So the game has changed for a reason. And yes, I can understand some fans, right? If you can ignore that part and you remove it and you go, oh, the game's gone soft and it used to be so much more hard and it used to be more fun. But it has changed. And wishing and longing for the days of yore, it's not going to bring it back. It's ref differently now. It's played differently now, and it's played differently for a reason. And Kareem Jackson has been playing this way for an awfully long time. I go back the 2020 season. There was a game he took AJ Boye out in if you look that, it's nearly frame for frame what he was ejected for on Sunday. He also took a Chargers player out in a different play in that game. This has been going on for ages. And I think it was Jay Feely said that he felt that the suspension was less about this particular hit, and it was more about sending a message, because this has been week after week after week, and the fines don't seem to be sending a message. And he thinks it's about sending a message, not just to Jackson, but to the rest of the league, that things have changed and it has to move on.
I wondered at that point, Colin, we talked about this last week, and it's perhaps not coincidental with DK Metcalf making those ill-judged comments about, I'm not going to change the way I play the game. The NFL pretty much saw their shot here and they took it.
I think so. I think the league isn't adverse to that. Now, I think what will be very interesting is to see, does it get reduced on appeal? Because up to now, the league has been very soft overall on, putting out a suspension and then rowing back when it is appealed. But I saw some mad stuff like on social media this week, like going back to somebody 1998 and saying a player only got suspended for 8 games after a passenger died in a car crash, and Ray Lewis didn't get any game. Yeah, well, Ray Lewis should have got banned. We all know what happened there, but he didn't. But guess what? It's 2023 now, and the world has moved on, and things have moved on, and we now live in a world where Henry Ruggs will fortunately never play in the league again. And hits like Kareem Jackson put on the other day they can't continue. So I do think, Connor, you're right in that. I think the league saw an opportunity, but it will be interesting to me to see if it does get reduced on appeal.
Yeah, and as you say, the game has changed for a reason. We saw a lot less of Joe Montana than we would have liked to have seen. The accumulated hits that he took forced him out of the game. A lot of late hits, a lot of dirty hits. God knows how many Super Bowl rings Joe would have won if the game had been, if the rules had been what they are and it had been refed the way it is today. Bo Jackson, there's many other players whose careers were cut short because of the punishment they took. So I think on balance, you can go back and look at the highlight reels of the smash hits of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but it's inarguably a much better product now than it was then. And
just go back and look at Jim Bort's hit on Joe Montana in that championship game for the Giants. That was a nicely measured, shall we say, time as he was about to show the ball.
Look, as a Bears fan, there's plenty in the in the locker there, including Mr. Butkus, Lord rest him, who we lost this season, that you wouldn't get away with today. But just speaking of the Bears, the final of those SOS games, and I'm not necessarily sure it saved the season again, but look, let's squeeze it in while we have the time. Bears won that battle of the backups in Chicago, and it's a Cinderella story. Whatever way it goes from here, Tyson Bagent, Division 2, undrafted free agent, comes in and wins a game in the NFL. There's people talking up whether there's a quarterback controversy in Chicago. I'm not buying that for a second. A guy comes in and plays against the Raiders, who are probably the most meh team in the league, kind of slightly miraculously entering that game 3-3. One of my favorite Raiders moments, Josh McDaniel moments from that game, by the way, is they kicked a field goal when they were on 4th and goal, down like 18 in the 4th quarter. Like, good man, Josh. You can chip away at it. Don't leave the points on the table. Like, absolutely gutless play call, and they got what they deserved at the end of the game. And we shall see what happens with Tyson Bagent's career from here. But I'm delighted for him. I think he had like 65 members of his family in the stands for the game, including his dad, the 17-time national arm wrestling champion, nicknamed the Beast, who's now bequeathed his name to Tyson Bagent. It's just a great story. I just love it all ends up. Look, it moves the Bears to 2-5. Packers lost as well, so we've got company in the basement in the NFC North, which may be a slightly more competitive division than we imagined, but I think it's going to be between the Vikings and the Lions somehow at the top of that. I don't think we'll see anyone else going to the playoffs out of that division. All right, we move to our third segment now, and having focused in on some of the teams and players talking points wise, we're going to broaden out the lens a little bit more and look at which are the key divisional battles to watch out for, because there's some really spicy ones at the moment. AFC East, Brian, a team where the Jets are still not out of it at 3-3, hanging in there after the Rodgers injury. The Bills have definitely come back to the pack, taking a couple of bad losses, one in London and the one we discussed a little bit earlier against the Patriots. The Dolphins again have looked alternately brilliant, and also then taking a couple of hard defeats themselves, as they did against Philly at the weekend. But the East is far from AFC least.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix and match really at the moment. I mean, the Bills are clearly, defensively, you saw what the Patriots done on Sunday. I don't want to isolate it to just one game, because the week prior to that, if the Giants had been more efficient, there would have been more points. Like, Milano is obviously a huge loss for them. We saw the London game, and you double that down with other players going down injury. Defensively, they don't look right. On Sunday, Josh Allen scrambled. I think he scrambled 9 times where it looked like he was dead to rights, and he managed to get out of it. Didn't necessarily get the first down off the plays, but the offensive line is a bit of a concern right now. They just don't seem to be playing at the level in which we're seeing. Like, they could easily be off a 3-game losing streak right now between London, the inefficiency of the Giants' offense to kill that game off, and obviously losing to the Patriots. It's they got the Bucs on Thursday night. That'll be interesting to how they react. I think the Dolphins should still be in a very very pleased on where they're at. Like, to go into at this stage of the season to be top of the division, 2 losses. They got the Patriots this weekend. There is some flaws within the team, but by and large, they've been quite impressive. The other two, the Jets are hanging around. Maybe that's the right term to use. They're finding ways to navigate victories, but I just don't know if that's sustainable over the long term, no matter who they've got coming up on the schedule with the quarterback situation. The Zach Wilson experience. I think the Patriots will have those type of results. They'll win a couple of games when we're not expecting them, but ultimately I still think they're a poor side, and will, come Sunday, talking about picks now for Sunday, I think the Dolphins will have a huge rebound against the Patriots on Sunday. But I still think the Dolphins and Bills, it's all to play for, but certainly not the Bills that we talked a couple of weeks ago was the AFC.
And it's hard to, and you've touched on some of the issues there with the Bills column. It's hard to know what's going on there behind the scenes, because at times, as Brian just said there, they've looked like the same old Bills, consistently racking up 12 and 13 wins. They beat all the teams that they're expected to. Yeah, they'll take a couple of L's along the way, but so consistent, so professional. It hasn't really clicked for them so far this season. And they're certainly not away and clear in the East, and the Dolphins nipping at their heels.
No, I think that the issues on defense are making Josh Allen play. He's pressing it again too much, and that was, I suppose, in the final season with Dable and perhaps the beginning of last season. We saw Josh Allen play with more control. And we've seen it at times this year, but it feels this year he's playing again. It's chaotic, Josh, and he's just launching stuff and he's trying too hard. And I think some of that is because he like the defense is taking the injuries, and he knows that this is probably the last year of this iteration of the Bills. Okay, they're going to have to move on from a number of players after this season, realistically, and I think that he's just trying to make it happen. I think that in turn means that they're not as cohesive as you would probably like them to be.
One interesting part of all of that, though, when we talk about all of the elements that maybe aren't clicking, probably the one that a lot of people have pointed their finger at and said, well, that could be trouble. Stephon Diggs has actually been the standout for them. He's been amazing.
Yeah, I think, again, people probably read too much into maybe the off-field drama a lot of the time. And Diggs is a guy who clearly enjoys playing football. He's a wide receiver. They're divas. It's how they are. They wear, their emotions all the time. You talked about DK Metcalf. Like, name me a wide receiver who AJ Brown has been on a run of unbelievable games, and he's still coming out saying, I should be getting the ball more. And it's how they are. Like, that's what you kind of want in many ways from a wide receiver. And like, there's that famous kind of tweet about the way in which the different positions tweet, and quarterback is love my guys, praise God, and why the tight ends is just like goofy, running back is putting in the hard work, and the wide receiver is like, I'm being stalked by the shadow of death, carry on a big stick, because these guys are always in their heads.
Brian, the AFC North, probably before the season we would have said it was going to be the most competitive division, but it hasn't necessarily been competitive in the way we thought it would be competitive. The teams that we are seeing now leading the way, and maybe not necessarily what we would have expected. We certainly wouldn't have said at this stage that the Bengals would be bottom of the heap, but they're still only at 3-3, and they're well in the mix. The Ravens, as we've already talked about, looking the class of the division so far, but it's very much all to play for.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, I know we'll probably go around the houses. I'll start with the Steelers, and for me, they're in a false position. Offensively, they don't have enough. Like, in the last weekend, I thought there was bright spots, because obviously the Pickens relationship is there, and I think to have Deontay Johnson come back was very helpful, because it took the eyes off Pickens for large parts of the game, because obviously Johnson had a 29-yard run in the second half off a catch of yards after catch. Like, he's a very effective player in his own right, so they do have talent there, and they had the run game going, but I just feel like they're on borrowed time. It's probably a bit unfair, bearing in mind we are in the season. That is very dubious clock, or where they place the ball. I mean, that's probably another story, and we could have found the Rams getting the ball back, and who knows. But I think at some stage, like the Steelers this weekend, they're playing the Jags. I mean, I think we're talking about teams moving in the right direction, upper echelon teams. The Jags aren't far off that. They go into New Orleans and win that. I'm just wondering, this game is a bit of a marker now for the Steelers at the weekend, but Mike Tomlin just has a way of navigating these victories when he least expect it. It was probably the same last weekend. In terms of the Browns,
if I could have that pick back, Brian, like, you think Mike Tomlin off the bye all day long. What was I thinking?
Well, I wasn't even that. I picked them because I was reading storylines around. There was like 50,000 Steelers fans expected to turn up, because they're everywhere across the country in the States. It's not just condensed into the Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania area. And I knew they were going to take over SoFi, and it would feel like a home game for them. The Browns, for me, are a quarterback away from being a really strong side. I picked them to go to playoffs. I still stand by that. I still believe they're going to be there at the end. And the Bengals, for me, in a strange way, in a roundabout way, worry me, because they've won games, they've got back into it, but they're very abject against the Seahawks 2 weeks ago in the red zone. They couldn't find a way. They got away with that one. And they're going into San Fran at the weekend, who are going to be looking to rebound off Monday night. Like, they can find themselves quickly 2 games again, dip back on the Ravens if the Ravens go into Arizona and win. But it's a really strong division, and I think when we did our AFC North stuff before the season, and even in June, we all felt it would be a very competitive division this year. It's the nature of the division, but I still think there's some teams, in particular the Steelers, in a false position.
Colin, Bengals fans will say, well, they were 4-4 after 8 games last year, and then they went on a tear. And they don't look the same, though, at 3-3. And the Burrow injury obviously has overshadowed everything. they found ways to win, and that I guess is encouraging in that they're competitive and they're resilient. But it's just not the Bengals team that we expected, and probably, to be fair, the league is poorer for it because there's nothing better than seeing them at full tilt.
Yeah, no, they will get, I suppose, the opportunity to kind of prove it over the next couple of weeks with the 49ers and the Bills. And I think for both of those teams, given the 49ers have just lost 2 on the bounce, the last thing you want is to be facing a Bengals side that desperately needs to win and that, is finding ways. And yeah, it hasn't been pretty at times, and they have, been their own worst enemy, but they are a team who, went to the Super Bowl for a reason, and they have a lot of talent there. But I do think the next couple of weeks will probably tell us a lot. But it's not going to be easy for them to get there, because even after that, they face an improving Texans team, and then they're against the Ravens. And but that's been a really interesting battle. So and then it's Steelers. So by the time they play the Jags, I think at the beginning of December, we should have we should really know where they're at. But I wouldn't rule them out, because Burrow is getting healthier, and even when he hasn't been healthy, they have found ways to win.
Brian, the NFC West, we probably would have thought at the start of the season, to be fair, would just be between the Niners and the Seahawks, but that's not the way it's panned out. The Rams are still involved. Yeah, the Cardinals are bottom of the division, but they are not an easy out on a weekly basis. They, at least until halftime, have been in pretty much every game they've played, and they obviously knocked off the Cowboys in a bit of a marker of a game for Jonathan Gannon and his team there. It's a lot more fun, and it's a lot more intriguing than we'd given it credit for before the season started.
In terms of the Cardinals,
in terms of the Rams being in the mix, the Cardinals.
Sorry, okay. Well, the Rams look, obviously they've got some, like Colin touched on it around June, the nature of what they did after the draft. They signed so many players, undrafted players, and they tried out so many players, brought in players on various different contracts to try to see could they get a balanced team. And it's working out, but I think we underestimated the hunger and attitude of Sean McVay. He looked like kind of a lost guy last year. He certainly doesn't look the case this year. But I think ultimately, gradually over the course of time during the season, we're going to see the 2 guys pull away, which is Seattle and 49ers. But even Seattle, like, they're winning games, but they're not striking me as a team that are playing at the level we would have expected. Like, Gino was very sloppy in that game. Strikes me as a quarterback, and I think we discussed it offline. He's one play away from a complete meltdown and disaster. But he just seems to find a way to navigate against it, because maybe his defense or other players are getting him out of holes. But that game for me should have been more comfortable at the weekend.
I've watched him a couple of times this season and thought exactly the same thing. Like, I'm still really not sure about this guy. He just, you wince sometimes when he throws the ball, and he somehow gets away with it. I suppose they got a pretty elite receiver core, to be fair to them, in Seattle. So they're turning some of those 45, 55s into 60, 40 and getting them out of trouble. But my feeling is this is the guy that you win with, not because of. And I think that the ceiling is only so high with the Seahawks because of him. Like, I think our view of Geno was certainly helped by how poorly Russell Wilson played last season, and the Seahawks looked like they were sitting pretty on that side of the equation. But as far as viewing them in isolation and viewing them as serious contenders, there's so many pieces there in place, but that's the one that I'd have the big doubt about.
Yeah, but the thing is that while, there are questions about Geno, this defense is a defense you win because of.
Yeah, they're playing at such a marquee level. I know, like you saw, the way in which they closed out the game on Sunday, they take the field goal. If the game is over, but still give the Cardinals back the ball. We're gonna close this game out, and it's just, you got Witherspoon playing. Saw the stats today. He's now deemed to be the number 1 cornerback in the league based on the performance to date and the nature of his stats and numbers and what he's done in terms of getting to the quarterback and obviously interceptions and stuff. For the cornerback to come in and have that immediate reaction, but it's the nature of the scouting staff and what the GM has done, because like, this is hot off them having a really strong draft last year with 2 cornerbacks last year, and in Kobe Bryant and Mullen coming in, and you complement it with Witherspoon coming in. Like, it's only going to improve as over the course of 3 or 4 years.
Colin, the NFC South, a team with no elite team in it, but at least entertaining and competitive because of that, right? Bucks have been slightly better than we might have expected. The Falcons probably right around where we thought, and the Saints probably slightly worse. And the Derek Carr thing is chafing at the moment. I think that's quite interesting. When you watch him at the weekend and he's at war with his receivers, they either don't know where they're supposed to be or he's not getting the ball anywhere near them. Like at one point he's shouting at Chris Olave, like, you threw the ball 10 yards out of bounds, Derek. It was nowhere near Olave. However fast he goes, and we can talk about his off-field speed, which is going to get him into a little bit of trouble, it seems, with the law. But it's a frustrating watch for Saints fans at the moment. And O'Brien had tipped them hotly at the start of the season, but the division itself is very spicy.
It is, but in probably not in a quality sort of way. I mean, the Falcons have I think their defense again, it goes back to I expected the Falcons offense to be so much fun, but it's the defense that has been winning them games. The Falcons offense find new ways to turn the ball over every single week. And Desmond Ridder just cannot seem to keep hold of the ball. And every time he finds a new way, and every time it cuts to Arthur Smith, and Arthur Smith looks, more and more pained. Yeah, it is. It's like, when in Simpsons where Homer is having the heart attack and he's doing all these different faces. That is Arthur Smith every time on the sidelines. The Panthers have handed over play calling duties from Frank Reich. I mean, there's already talk about could Frank Reich move on before the end of the season. And yeah, the Derek Carr thing is strange because it's like he's trying too hard. It's like he's trying to prove he's in charge, and that's never been Derek Carr's way. And things don't feel right there. I don't think Dennis Allen will be in charge there next season. And the Bucks have been spicy, or at least they started off that way. But we've probably seen the limits of Baker over the past couple of weeks.
Brian, just a word on those Saints who you tipped to go to the championship game. And look, we can all have predictions that they're not necessarily going to pan out the way we thought they would. But it's why is that not working right now? Because and is there a chance that it gets right? Because you watch Carr, particularly over the weekend, and all he's got in his locker right now is to check down to Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that. Throughout the course of 3 quarters, it was Kamara or busts, and I thought as the course of the game went on, in particular the 4th quarter, I don't know whether the Jags defense tore it in the dome, but they got a few nice, I suppose, longer, expansive throws, and they got back into the game. But as I've touched on it there, I think he's nailed it. It's just clearly a mismatch and disconnect between him and the receivers, and it just doesn't seem right. As you said, he's giving out to people. He's giving out to everybody but himself. It's where you think as a guy who's gone in, and I thought he could win as a bit of a leader. Brandon Mundy, he'd have the chip on his shoulder, and he's got the experience. There's a lot of young guys there offensively. We talk about the experience. I thought they'd be really strong because of defense and the nature. And Colin rightly called it was kind of like the final opportunity for this defense to put themselves in a position to be back in the playoffs. And that I thought they'd rely on the defense, but yeah, Carr would still put them in a position, but it's just not there. And it's like they brought in players that haven't worked out. Williams coming back off the IR, maybe they might get a bit of a bounce from him in the running game. It just doesn't look. There's a big disconnect, and it's fractured offensively, and it's difficult to see how they'll get that back.
All right, before we wrap on our Week 7 talking points, we thought we'd have a look at a couple of teams whose records are not what they say they are, going against the old Bill Parcells saw. So we each thought we'd have a look at 1 or 2 teams that we think are slightly fraudulent. They're either better than their records suggest, or they're hiding behind the numbers. And maybe I'll go for a Steelers choice. We've talked about the Steelers already. One of the ones I think is maybe slightly better than the record suggests, and we may have ruled them out of the NFC West race earlier on. I think the Rams have something about them. They took a tough loss to the Bengals that could have gone the other way. And Puka Nacua has probably been the offensive find of the season. Tutu Atwell now starting to play as well. I think McVay looks re-energized. I think they'll be a little bit more competitive down the stretch than maybe some people are giving them credit for. I can see this team maybe sneaking into a wild card slot. Colin, who's your team that's not what their record says they are?
Oh, it is the Las Vegas Raiders. You are not what your record says you are. And I know there are Raiders fans out there who thought we were harsh on this team. If you're a team who lost to the Raiders, right? This has been a kind of a strange NFL season, and people are trying to figure out, who is where. If you have lost to the Raiders this season, it's over. I don't care what your record is. I don't care if you had a win at the weekend. I don't care. You are. This is a bad football team, and you are worse than them. So the Packers, you're not going anywhere this year. The Broncos, you are not doing absolutely anything this season, and the Patriots, forget about it, because you lost to Josh McDaniels and the Raiders, a team who lost to Jeff Saturday, and yet he retained his job. Everything you hear, like, it's incredible. Every week they find new ways to embarrass themselves and that franchise more. Like, Connor, I'm happy for you and for Bears fans, but
they lost to an undrafted free agent.
Did you even good for him? Like, kudos to him. But the kid, like, he wasn't throwing, like, there wasn't a pass of more than 10 yards. Like,
no, he averaged, I think, 5.6 yards per attempt. I mean, it was the perfect game plan. It's how you manage your guy who's thrown into at the deep end. In fairness to Luke Getsy, who takes a lot of flack, it couldn't have been better. Lean heavily on the run game, but yeah, as you say, Josh McDaniels found a way to lose to that guy. And
like the decision to go with Jimmy Garoppolo, and the fact that, like, they decide to go with Jimmy, who really I don't think was an upgrade on Carr to begin with, but then Jimmy can't even sign because he's got the injury, and then he's injured again, which we all knew was going to happen because Jimmy is always injured. That's just how it goes. And then you decide to go with Brian Hoyer. Like, none of it makes any sense. Devontae Adams clearly wants out. I don't care that you're 3-4. Things are rotten in the state of Denmark, and they're even more so in Las Vegas. And Mark Davis was shouting at fans earlier in the season who wanted Josh McDaniels out. I think, he's going to need to be back in the owner's box, because otherwise he's probably going to get pelted with rotten fruit. It's a disaster. And that's saying something when I'm saying that as the team who sits bottom of the AFC West.
Brian, we leave you with the last word. Who's the team who's not what their record says they are for you?
Well, that would be the LA Chargers. Lo and behold, I'm gonna slam Mr. Brandon Staley because they're 2-4. And I read a report yesterday saying, "Oh, well, look, they're playing the Bears again." But I'll just, don't take it the wrong way, kind of. They're saying they're playing the Bears on Sunday Night Football. Sure, there's a win, but the following week they got to play the Lions. And I think they have another tougher game even before that. So just bear with me a second. Sorry, they played the Jets and they played the Lions. And bearing in mind the nature where those teams could be, they're not winnable games, in my opinion. And they've won 2 games this season, despite all the accolades in which Justin Herbert put up in Minnesota. He got over the line there because the inefficiency of Minnesota to put that game away at the end, and the turnover count in that game by the Vikings. And they beat the Raiders, who Colin has touched on there, are not for real. And they squeaked past a 5th-round quarterback who they sacked 8 times in the game. And it took a Justin Herbert throw from 52 yards to put the game away. Like, it's just not good enough. Like, they've got so many talented players there. But offensively, it's broken. And like, they did well against the Chiefs, don't get me wrong. But genuinely, did anybody honestly think they're going to find a way to win this game? We all knew what was going to happen. If they go blow for blow for 2.5 quarters, and then obviously the Chiefs would pull away. That's the nature of how the game played out. And they're 2-4, and this weekend they might be 3-4, but they still got 3 or 4 more difficult games. The AFC West is gone. Being realistic, like, let's be honest, they're 3 games back on the Chiefs, and the Chiefs have beaten them, so they're 4 games back on the Chiefs. The AFC West is over. I mean, it's October and it's over. So then we got to flip our attention to 3 wildcard spots, and we're talking about an AFC North that arguably could have 2 or 3 teams coming out of it. They ain't making the playoffs. And Brandon Staley's gone. And me and Colin stayed in a hotel across from SoFi. And a little story. Colin got the lovely room. And me and our former colleague, Mark Cockrell, got something out of a bread bin. And that's where they should put Brandon Staley, into that bread bin room, because he needs a bit of time away from everybody. Chargers aren't making the playoffs. It's just bizarre. There's 3 teams in the AFC West. And then there's 1 team, ultimately, who's going to probably be there in Vegas come February. Just if I was a Chargers fan, I'd be blowing my head off it.
Right. Well, before we close out on our Week 7 talking points, can I just say, if you are listening back on podcasts and you enjoy your weekly Brandon Staley rant, please remember to like, subscribe, or rate the podcast wherever, whichever platform you're listening on. It really helps others find the show, and it really gives us a boost and spreads the Irish NFL show gospel. But that is where we leave it for our Week 7 talking points. We'll be back with you very soon.